I didn't plan on staying long. Honestly, I was just doing a favor for my friend, Amir. He'd left a book at my place the night before, and since his house was only a few blocks away, I thought I'd drop it off on my way to the grocery store. Simple, quick, no reason to overthink it. But the thing about moments that change you is they never feel like they're about to. I walked up the narrow stone pathway to his front door, the late afternoon sun warm on my back. The house looked quiet, curtains drawn halfway, a gentle breeze swaying the flower pots on the porch. As I reached the door, I hesitated for half a second, my knuckles hovering midair, before finally knocking twice. I expected Amir to open the door. Instead, it was her, his mom. She opened the door with a soft creak, and for a moment, the sunlight spilled around her like she carried it with her. She was wearing a loose, cream-colored blouse, sleeves rolled just below her elbows, and her dark hair was tied up carelessly, a few strands framing her face. She was striking, but not in an obvious way. There was a calm elegance about her, the kind that doesn't need effort to draw you in. And then she smirked. "Don't run," she said softly, tilting her head just slightly, her voice carrying a teasing warmth. "You knocked on my door first." I blinked, caught off guard, and for a second I forgot how words worked. Yeah, I was just dropping this off for Amir." I held out the book, hoping my awkwardness wasn't painfully obvious. Her eyes flicked from the book to my face, and there was something in her expression, amusement, maybe, but also a quiet curiosity. She leaned slightly against the doorframe, one hand resting casually on it, and that small gesture made the moment feel slower somehow. "You can give it to me," she said, reaching out. As her fingers brushed mine when she took the book, a subtle warmth ran through me. It wasn't deliberate, just one of those accidental touches you're not supposed to notice, but somehow you do. I tried to step back, but she didn't move immediately. "Amir's out right now," she said gently, her gaze holding mine just a little longer than necessary. "But thank you for bringing this." There was something disarming about the way she looked at me, confident, but not imposing. It made me feel seen in a way I wasn't prepared for. I nodded quickly, murmured a polite, "No problem," and turned to leave. But as I walked down the path, I could still feel her presence behind me, the soft cadence of her voice lingering in my head. And though I wouldn't admit it, then something about that brief encounter had already shifted something deep inside me. I didn't expect to see her again so soon. 2 days after that awkward doorstep encounter, Amir called me, asking if I could return another stack of books I'd borrowed months ago. I almost said no, not because it was inconvenient, but because I wasn't sure if I was ready to face her again. Still, I found myself standing at the same door later that evening, holding 3 books under my arm. This time, I knocked with a little more confidence, or at least I told myself I did. When the door opened, it wasn't Amir again. It was her. "Back already?" she asked, raising an eyebrow, her lips curling into a knowing smirk. I cleared my throat. "Just dropping these off for Amir." She crossed her arms lightly, leaning against the doorframe, her posture relaxed but intentional. "You seem to be doing a lot of errands for him lately," she teased softly. "I'm starting to think you enjoy knocking on this door." My mouth went dry. I didn't know how to respond without sounding defensive or worse, obvious. I just thought I'd save him the trouble. I managed scratching the back of my neck. She laughed gently, not loud, just a soft ripple of amusement that somehow made my chest tighten. "Well," she said, stepping aside and gesturing subtly with her hand, "you might as well come in this time. No sense standing out there holding those like they weigh a ton." I hesitated for a moment, but stepped inside. The living room felt warm and welcoming, filled with soft lamplight and the faint scent of freshly brewed tea. A quiet instrumental track played in the background, something jazzy and slow, filling the silence between us. She reached for the books, and, as she did, her fingertips brushed against mine again. Not deliberately, but slowly enough that I felt it. A small spark of warmth ran through me, uninvited and undeniable. "Thanks," she murmured, setting the books on the coffee table. "You've been very helpful lately." It's nothing, I replied, shifting my weight awkwardly. Just returning what I borrowed. She tilted her head, studying me for a moment longer than I expected. There was a softness in her gaze, curious, maybe even amused, but layered with something I couldn't quite name. You know, she said finally, her voice carrying a quiet playfulness, you don't have to look so nervous every time you see me. I forced a laugh, trying to mask the fact that she'd read me perfectly. I'm not nervous, I lied. Her smirk deepened just slightly. Sure, she said, drawing out the word like she didn't believe me for a second. Before I could reply, Amir's voice called faintly from upstairs, breaking the moment like a pebble skipping across still water. She stepped back, her expression softening. I'll let him know you're here. I nodded quickly, but as I turned to leave, I caught one last glance from her. Brief, lingering, unspoken. And that single glance stayed with me long after I stepped back into the night air. Part 1. The unexpected knock, approximate. 500 words. I didn't plan on staying long. Honestly, I was just doing a favor for my friend, Amir. He left a book at my place the night before, and since his house was only a few blocks away, I thought I'd drop it off on my way to the grocery store. Simple. Quick. No reason to overthink it. But the thing about moments that change you is they never feel like they're about to. I walked up the narrow stone pathway to his front door, the late afternoon sun warm on my back. The house looked quiet, curtains drawn halfway, a gentle breeze swaying the flower pots on the porch. As I reached the door, I hesitated for half a second, my knuckles hovering midair, before finally knocking twice. I expected Amir to open the door. Instead, it was her, his mom. She opened the door with a soft creak, and for a moment, the sunlight spilled around her like she carried it with her. She was wearing a loose, cream-colored blouse, sleeves rolled just below her elbows, and her dark hair was tied up carelessly, a few strands framing her face. She was striking, but not in an obvious way. There was a calm elegance about her, the kind that doesn't need effort to draw you in. And then she smirked. "Don't run," she said softly, tilting her head just slightly, her voice carrying a teasing warmth. "You knocked on my door first." I blinked, caught off guard, and for a second I forgot how words worked. Yeah, I was just dropping this off for Amir. I held out the book, hoping my awkwardness wasn't painfully obvious. Her eyes flicked from the book to my face, and there was something in her expression, amusement, maybe, but also a quiet curiosity. She leaned slightly against the doorframe, one hand resting casually on it, and that small gesture made the moment feel slower somehow. "You can give it to me," she said, reaching out. As her fingers brushed mine when she took the book, a subtle warmth ran through me. It wasn't deliberate, just one of those accidental touches you're not supposed to notice, but somehow you do. I tried to step back, but she didn't move immediately. "Amir's out right now," she said gently, her gaze holding mine just a little longer than necessary. "But thank you for bringing this." There was something disarming about the way she looked at me, confident but not imposing. It made me feel seen in a way I wasn't prepared for. I nodded quickly, murmured a polite, "No problem," and turned to leave. But as I walked down the path, I could still feel her presence behind me, the soft cadence of her voice lingering in my head. And though I wouldn't admit it then, something about that brief encounter had already shifted something deep inside me. It started with something simple. A week passed after that second visit, and I hadn't planned on going back. But then, late one afternoon, Amir called me in a rush. He needed his laptop charger before a late-night project, and of course, it was sitting on my desk. So, once again, I found myself walking up that stone pathway, charger in hand, rehearsing a casual "here you go" in my head. When I knocked, the door opened, and there she was again. This time, though, she didn't greet me with a smirk. Instead, she looked softer, almost tired. She was dressed casually, her hair tied loosely, and there was no trace of the playful teasing she usually wore like armor. I said gently, holding up the charger. "Amir asked me to drop this off." She smiled faintly, but it didn't reach her eyes. Thanks, he's at the library. I guess you'll have to deal with me instead. I hesitated before asking, Are you okay? For a moment, she didn't answer. Then she stepped aside, gesturing for me to come in. I followed her into the living room, the same warm, softly lit space I'd been in before, but this time it felt different, quieter, heavier somehow. She sat down on the edge of the couch, and after a pause, I sat at the far end, careful to leave space between us. You ever have days where everything feels heavier than it should? She asked suddenly, staring at her hands. I nodded slowly, yet more often than I'd like. She exhaled, almost like she'd been holding it in. It's nothing dramatic, she said softly. Just life piling up, I guess. There was something disarming about hearing her admit that. Up until now, she'd always seemed so composed, so untouchable. But now, sitting there next to her, I saw the quiet vulnerability she kept hidden beneath the surface. You don't have to handle everything alone, I said gently, surprising even myself. She glanced at me then, really looked at me, and for a moment, the room went silent except for the faint hum of the ceiling fan. Her gaze softened, and something unspoken passed between us, a recognition of two people carrying more than they let on. Thanks, she said quietly, her voice steadier now. Most people don't say things like that. Without thinking, I rested my hand lightly on the arm of the couch near hers. Not touching, just close enough to be felt. She noticed, though, because her lips curved into the faintest, most fragile smile. For the next half hour, we talked about small things, about life, about regrets neither of us had shared with anyone else. Somewhere in that quiet conversation, the distance between us shrank without either of us moving an inch. When I finally stood to leave, she walked me to the door. Thank you, she said again, her voice low, almost like a secret. And as I stepped outside, I realized something had shifted. This wasn't just casual banter anymore. There was trust now, a fragile thread pulling us closer, whether we admitted it or not. I told myself I wouldn't overthink it. After that quiet evening, when she opened up, I tried to convince myself that it was nothing, just two people talking, sharing a rare, honest moment. But in the days that followed, I caught myself replaying our conversation more times than I should have. The softness in her voice, the way she smiled when I said she didn't have to carry everything alone. I told myself to stop, but my heart didn't listen. A few evenings later, I found myself walking up that familiar stone pathway again, this time carrying another book Amir wanted back. I told myself that was the only reason I was there. That's what I wanted to believe. When the door opened, she stood there, this time in a simple slate blue blouse and jeans, her hair falling loosely over her shoulders. She wasn't dressed up, yet somehow she carried herself like elegance came naturally to her. You again, she said softly, her lips curling into a faint smile. If I didn't know better, I'd think you're looking for excuses to visit. I laughed lightly, pretending her words didn't make my heart stumble. Amir just keeps forgetting his stuff at my place, I replied, holding up the book as evidence. She tilted her head slightly, her gaze steady, almost searching. She hummed, as though she didn't quite believe me. Then, stepping aside, she gestured for me to come in. The living room was washed in warm, amber light from the setting sun, filtering through the curtains. Shadows danced softly along the walls, and the faint scent of brewed coffee hung in the air. It felt intimate somehow, even though nothing about the moment should have been. She set the book down and turned back to me. Coffee? She asked casually. Sure, I said, trying to sound indifferent even though my pulse quickened. As she moved around the kitchen, I couldn't help but notice the little things. The way she brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear, the quiet hum she let out when she concentrated, the soft clink of spoons against ceramic. When she handed me the cup, our fingers brushed again, just for a second, but long enough to feel the subtle warmth in her touch. Thanks, I murmured, my voice lower than I intended. She sat opposite me, wrapping her hands around her own cup. For a while we talked, small things, casual things. But between the words, there were silences that felt different now. heavier, charged. Every so often, I'd catch her glancing at me over the rim of her cup, and when our eyes met, she wouldn't look away immediately. She'd hold my gaze just long enough to make my breath catch, then glance down with the faintest curve of her lips, like she knew exactly what she was doing. I left a little while later, but not before stealing one last glance at her. She was leaning against the doorway, arms folded, watching me with a smile that lingered longer than it should have. And as I walked back home, coffee still warm in my hand, I realized something I couldn't ignore anymore. This wasn't casual anymore. Not for me. And, judging by the way she'd looked at me, maybe not for her either. It was supposed to be a simple favor. Amir had texted me early that morning, asking if I could help his mom carry in some groceries since he'd be out with friends. I hesitated before replying, knowing what that meant and what it could feel like. I told myself it was nothing, just helping. That was all. By late afternoon, I was at their driveway, watching her struggle slightly with a couple of heavy bags. Without a word, I jogged over and grabbed them from her hands. "You didn't have to," she said, slightly out of breath, but smiling softly. "I know," I replied, setting the bags on the kitchen counter. "But I wanted to." She gave me a look I couldn't quite read, her lips parting like she was about to say something, but instead she just nodded, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. The kitchen smelled of fresh bread and faint citrus, warm, comforting, homely. I started helping her unpack without being asked, handing her jars and boxes one by one. Somewhere between passing her the last carton of milk and setting the bread down, our fingers touched, lightly, briefly, but this time, neither of us moved away immediately. There was no teasing smile, no playful remark, just a quiet pause. "You've grown up a lot," she said suddenly, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. I glanced at her, a little caught off guard. "What do you mean?" "When you used to come around with Amir years ago," she said, resting her hands on the counter, "you were just this quiet, shy kid who barely spoke. And now," she stopped, as if weighing her words carefully, "now you carry yourself differently, more grounded." I swallowed, unsure how to respond. Compliments from her carried weight I wasn't ready to admit. "I guess Tom does that," I said finally, my voice low. She nodded slowly, her gaze fixed on me for a moment longer than necessary. "Yeah, Tom changes a lot of things." There was something in her tone, something layered, unspoken, and it made the silence between us feel heavier than before. To break it, I asked about her day, and that opened a different door entirely. She talked about her work, her dreams she once had but never fully pursued, and little regrets she rarely voiced to anyone. I listened, really listened, and when she laughed at herself, I found myself smiling without meaning to. It felt natural, easy, like we were standing on a quiet little island, just the two of us. By the time we finished unpacking, the kitchen was spotless, but neither of us moved to leave right away. She leaned against the counter, arms crossed loosely, watching me. "Thanks for helping," she said softly, almost like it meant more than just groceries. I shrugged gently, meeting her gaze. "You don't have to thank me." Her lips curved into the faintest smile, one that felt private, like it was meant just for me. And as I left the house that evening, I couldn't shake the feeling that the line between casual kindness and something deeper had blurred. The rain started earlier than the forecast had promised. I'd come by in the evening to return a book I'd borrowed weeks ago. Amir wasn't home. He'd texted to say he'd be out late, but I thought I'd drop it off anyway. I told myself it was just a quick visit. 5 minutes, no more. But as I walked up the stone pathway, the first raindrops began to fall. By the time she opened the door, the sky had opened up completely, and I was standing there, half-soaked, clutching the book awkwardly. She smiled faintly when she saw me, her expression soft but amused. "You really have a knack for showing up when the weather turns, don't you?" I laughed quietly, brushing rain from my hair. "Guess I didn't plan this one too well." "Come in before you catch a cold," she said gently, stepping aside. The warmth of the house wrapped around me instantly. The soft hum of a heater, the faint scent of brewed tea, the low glow of lamps in the living room. Outside, The rain tapped steadily against the windows, a calm rhythm that seemed to make the whole world feel slower. She disappeared briefly and came back with a small towel. "Here," she said, handing it to me. "Dry off before you leave puddles everywhere." I took it, our fingers grazing lightly in the exchange, and that simple touch carried a quiet charge I couldn't ignore. "You can wait out the rain," she added, her voice softer now. "No point in getting drenched." So I stayed. We sat on opposite ends of the couch at first, mugs of tea warming our hands, talking about small things, the weather, books, little fragments of life that didn't mean much, but somehow felt significant when spoken in the quiet. But as the minutes stretched into an hour, the distance between us subtly shrank. She shifted slightly closer, resting her elbow on the armrest beside me. I leaned back, mirroring her without thinking. At one point, I set my mug down, and when I reached to take it back, my hand brushed against hers resting on the table. Neither of us pulled away this time. Her fingers were warm, steady, comforting. I looked up, and she was already looking at me. Her gaze was calm, but beneath it, there was something unspoken, something neither of us dared to name. For a long, quiet moment, neither of us moved. The sound of rain filled the silence between us, steady and soft, like the world outside didn't exist anymore. Finally, she exhaled, barely above a whisper. "You should probably stay until it eases up." I nodded, my voice caught somewhere in my chest. "Yeah, I think I will." We didn't touch beyond that single brush of hands. We didn't need to. The weight of that moment, the closeness, the unspoken choice, was more than enough. And as the rain kept falling outside, I realized something had shifted between us again. Not in words, not in actions, but in something deeper, a quiet acknowledgement neither of us dared to speak aloud. The rain stopped just after midnight. For a long while, neither of us had said anything. We sat there on the couch, mugs empty, the soft hum of the heater filling the silence between us. Outside, the storm slowly faded, the rhythmic tapping of raindrops replaced by the occasional drip from the eaves. Eventually, she glanced toward the window and smiled faintly. "Looks like it's finally easing up," she murmured, her voice quiet, almost reluctant. I nodded, setting my cup aside. "Yeah, I should probably head home before it starts again." She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she leaned back against the couch, folding her arms loosely as if she were weighing whether to say something or let the moment pass. I waited, trying not to read too much into the silence, but my heart beat louder than the fading rain outside. Finally, she spoke. "It's nice, you know," she said softly, her gaze fixed somewhere on the coffee table rather than on me. "Having someone to talk to, someone who listens." Something about the way she said it, soft, deliberate, almost fragile, made me swallow hard before replying. "It's nice for me too," I said gently. "More than you probably realize." Her eyes lifted to meet mine then, and in that quiet exchange, words became unnecessary. There was understanding there, unspoken, yet undeniable. I stood after a moment, slipping on my jacket. She walked me to the door, the air between us thick with something neither of us dared name. The porch light cast a soft, golden glow across her face, and I caught myself memorizing the way the damp night air made loose strands of her hair cling gently to her cheek. At the doorway, I hesitated. "Thank you," I said, my voice lower than I intended. She tilted her head slightly. "For what?" "For tonight," I said, struggling to find the right words. "For trusting me. For everything." Her lips curved into the faintest smile, warm and knowing. "You make it easy to trust you," she whispered, almost as if she hadn't meant to say it out loud. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then, slowly, she reached out and rested her hand lightly on mine. Not for long, just enough to make my chest tighten in a way I couldn't explain. "Good night," she said softly, her voice carrying more meaning than the word itself should have held. I nodded, forcing myself to step back. "Good night." As I walked down the stone pathway, the ground still damp beneath my shoes, I felt the cool breeze brush against my skin. But inside, there was warmth, lingering, quiet, undeniable. I didn't know what would happen next. Neither of us did. But that night, under the soft glow of the porch light and the fading echo of rain, something had shifted between us. Permanently, silently, beautifully. And for the first time, I didn't feel the need to define it. I just let myself feel it.